He kōna ipurangi tēnei nā te reo irirangi o Aotearoa.
New York City, dawn 1984. Yellow taxis crisscross the grids of Manhattan, past the hot dog carts, newsagents and bodegas. Steam swirls from drains as the orange glow of streetlights gives way to the orange shimmer of dawn's light. Early morning joggers plod past posters for Death of a Salesman. The Broadway show would win the Tony for Best Revival. The city that never sleeps is about to pause. It's 6:32 a.m. on Monday the 10th of September. Wahine cool down to about 100 people waiting at the steps of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. In the dimness of daybreak, the building seems to loom larger than usual. One reviewer would write that on this morning it had an otherworldly glow, fitting for an historic pōhiri. The response is led by men in karakia. They're bearing proud and elegant. Among them, two rangatira, Henare Tūwhāngai and Sunny Waru. Curious locals jostle at the steel barricades, trying to catch a glimpse. It's the opening of Te Māori, an exhibition that, more than 40 years on, is still spoken of in reverential tones.
That is the blueprint, really, what happened those 40 years ago, with our kaumātua coming and insisting on us being in control and in charge of our representation.
It's remembered as a groundbreaker, a watershed, a benchmark, credited for giving taonga Māori an international platform, for showing that it could hold its own at one of the world's biggest art institutions, for referring to taonga Māori as art.
Certainly for museums and galleries, that shook up the whole world, whether they liked it or not. But I think for Māoridom, it sort of rekindled the knowledge and the pride and the esteem of our taonga.
But it also raised some big questions. How much of Te Māori was a political response to events at home? Where were the contemporary artists? Where were the women?
Robin was thinking, well, a lot of us were, but she in particular was talking about the art of Māori women not being part of Te Māori.
And why did it take an exhibition at the Met for Māori culture to be valued?
It's an uplifting experience for our people. It's a liberating experience for them to realise that their culture is beautiful.
Kia ora, I'm Matariki Williams, and this is Pūtātara, Revolutions in Māori Art. Last episode we were in Little Te Kaha. This time we're in Te Āporo Nui, the Big Apple, New York City. Episode 2, Home and Away.
E ngai wi o te motu, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Te Māori is an exhibition of 174 prized pieces of Māori art from the classic period.
This is Henare Te Ua, the late Māori broadcaster. He's in New York in 1984 too, for a special program for Radio New Zealand.
Between 400 and 500 people arrived for the ceremonies in connection with the opening. The karanga rang out, probably the first time this has happened on Fifth Avenue.
The Met, one of the most venerated of institutions, boasts 5,000 years of art from around the world. And here, kaumātua draped in feathered kākahu and tāniko bordered korowai, making their way through its doors, toko in hand. They're preceded by young toa, whose piu-piu rattle and sway as they inch forward, taiaha at the ready. Banners draped down the facade declare, Te Māori, Māori art from New Zealand collections. A white weapon, perhaps a wahaika made from whalebone, is reproduced in a black square. The ope continues through the doors and into a marble foyer, the Great Hall. watched over by large displays that include an Egyptian pharaoh and a Greek goddess. They pass glass cases of taonga from around the world as they make their way through expansive halls. A critic for the New York Times would remark, "We are dealing, that is to say, with sacred forces rather than with exalted curiosities." Their footsteps echo as the karakia continues.
Henare Tūwhangai, doyen of the Waikato people, chanted incantations as he led the kaumātua through the gallery. A blessing was given by the Anglican Archbishop of New Zealand, the Right Reverend Paul Reeves, after which one of Māoridom's most popular hymns was sung.
The karakia moved through the gallery, blessing the 174 taonga brought over from Aotearoa. There were waharoa and towering poutokomanua, standing staunch and ornately chiselled, the pride of marae and iwi. There were also tiny pendants, adzes, wakahuia and other objects of personal majesty. Here's William Cooper, the chair of the Te Māori Management Committee, to give us a bit of a tour.
The centre focuses on Uenuku, a Waikato war image, and greatly respected by not only Waikato but of course the whole of Māoridom. Behind us is the Te Kaha Pātaka barge pieces and matching kuaha. Behind Uenuku is a piece from North Auckland, very early carving style, Te Pōuri, one of the few really historic pieces of the north. This is the Pukeroa Gate, which once used to stand at Pukeroa Pā, where the Rotorua Hospital now stands. The imposing main figure there, of course, is a representation of Tutanekai. It carries Tutanekai's personal moko.
Some of the most delicate taonga were reiniho, adornments from Ngaitahu.
I am standing here at that taonga which was found one bay from where I come from at Port Levy, Kokorarata. It's looking at us, looking out at all the people.
Iri Hapiti Ramsden was a nurse, writer and anthropologist.
It's one of the smaller pieces in the exhibition, but it's full of mana. And its power reaches out, it sees things that we can't see and it knows things that we'll never know. But it's part of us and we're part of it.
When she saw the taonga of her ancestors, she said she was overcome with emotion.
There's no piece more beautiful than any other piece, and there's no piece with more mana than any other piece in this whole exhibition. But for me, every piece of pounamu comes from home. And all these pieces here belong to us. And we reach up from the South Island up to the North Island, and all the people there too, who are the people who belong to all this taonga. But for me, that little wicked-looking reiniho looking out at us, saying to us, "You're ours, and we're yours." And I know for me, I'm going to be buried one bay from where that was found, and we belong to each other.
The gallery was full of tears that Monday morning. After the ritual, everything else we saw during the day seemed secondary, wrote the New Yorker's Nancy Ramsey. The exhibition had a certain power, she wrote.
Rather hard to put your finger on it exactly as to what it is. It has a great spiritual power. It's got this ihiwehi and wana that Māori people are familiar with.
This is Hirini Mokomead. He's a tohunga, a teacher, a professor, an iwi leader, a treaty negotiator, and the author of dozens of books, among many, many accolades. In 1984, he was the head of the Department of Māori Studies at Victoria University and brought in as one of the curators for Te Māori. He says this moving opening was the culmination of nearly a decade's work. It took a unique approach to get all this taonga to New York. That's largely because iwi, hapu and marae demanded things be done differently.
We are not allowing people to experience the taonga in what we might describe as an academic way. That is, you're not allowing people simply to come in, take a quiet, dispassionate look at the taonga, sort of back off from them, sit down, have a smoke and think about them. They're not being allowed to do that.
So how did it work?
From the moment they come in, they are being affected by the people who are looking after Te Māori at that time. There is a welcome ceremony. There are guides. In other words, the people who are coming in to see Te Māori are going to be meeting Māori people. And that's one of the aspects of Te Māori that's different from any other exhibition.
Does that have any spin-offs in terms of racial tolerance in New Zealand, do you think?
I've heard differing opinions about that. One view is that Te Māori can be seen as one of the best bridge-building exercises that we have ever undertaken in this nation. But another school of thought is that because we've organised Te Māori to be a celebration of Māori culture and to be presented largely by Māori people, and because we have organised the Paipai on tribal lines, that what we have in fact accomplished is a separation of the different groups. And then Māori versus Pākehā, what we've done is polarise them through Te Māori. I myself am a bridge builder, but there are others of my colleagues who believe that because we have made Te Māori so Māori an experience, that what that has done is made Pākehā people aware that they are not Māori, which to me is not a bad thing to confront cultural truth. Te Māori is helping that process, that it must be good in the long run for people to realise that, well, yeah, I'm Irish, I better do something about my Irish tanga, if there's such a word.
In the exhibition guide, Tahirini wrote that Te Māori would highlight a tenacious will to survive. Māori art, he said, has been repudiated, rejected, vandalised, neglected, hidden and abused by Māori and white man alike. Here it was being celebrated by Richardson Dilworth, the chair of the Met's Board of Trustees.
The Metropolitan Museum is indeed honoured to present to the public these marvellous works representing the rich artistic heritage of the Maori people. With the ritual we have just witnessed, we hope that a heightened and long-standing relationship will be sustained between ourselves and the Maori people. For our part, we will gladly and conscientiously assume the responsibility of the care and respect of these objects while they are on exhibition at the Metropolitan.
What a moment. The world seeing Māori in an understanding of our history, and Māori seeing the world as active participants, as thriving global citizens. But in many ways, Te Māori was also something of a political response. Tahirini even alluded to it a bit earlier.
To me, it's not a bad thing to confront cultural truth. Te Māori is helping that process.
Te Māori had been approved in 1981 by the National Party government of Robert Muldoon. That was the same year the country was gripped by the Springbok Tour protests. And all that Māori activism we heard about last episode, that was still going on. You can't avoid the contradiction. Support for a massive exhibition of Māori art abroad while Māori are fighting for rights at home. By the time Te Māori opened in 1984, there had been a change of government. Labour's David Lange was Prime Minister and his new Minister for Māori Affairs was Koro Wetere. He was at the Met.
They are living items full of Māori. The life principle, the spirit of the talisman, the manifestation of the past, and the pathway into the future. This exhibition represents the first major showing of Māori culture outside New Zealand. Our culture has been thrust into the Tau Mālam, the world of life. We are rightly proud to display our culture through this exhibition to America.
So, how did this exhibition come about? It starts with Douglas Newton, who was the chair of the Met's Department of Primitive Art. Let's just take a beat here to say primitive art is no longer a widely used term. The implication's pretty clear. Primitive deems some works lesser or more naive than, say, European works, objects out of touch with any larger world. Anyway, Douglas Newton was born in Malaysia to English parents. He moved to the US in the 50s. He cared for a collection at the also unfortunately named Museum of Primitive Art. When that closed in 1974, its library, staff, 3,500 works, and Newton himself transferred to the Met. Here he is, speaking to Henare Te Ua in 1984.
In many ways, this has never really happened before. Of course, there are ceremonial openings with ambassadors and high dignitaries turning up, but there's never been an exhibition from the Pacific world, or even the African world that I know of, that has had this religious stamp placed on it, and this very vital connection with the belief, the traditions, and all the mana of the people involved with it.
By bringing all this Māori art to the US, what did Newton want the exhibition to achieve?
My expectation is this. I think it's going to be an absolute visual shock to the American public who've never seen anything of this quality from the Maori, are mostly completely unfamiliar with what Maori art is like anyway. I think it'll be a sort of a new world opening up for thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of art lovers. I think when you've got a potential audience of several 100,000 people, as we do, you're going to get an immense range of possible reactions, from indifference up to amazement, wonder, and very great emotion over the spectacle.
The idea for an exhibition was first hatched in the early 70s. Newton says he was talking with the New Zealand Consul General at the time, and they decided to approach the government. It gained initial support from then Prime Minister Norman Kirk, but after his death, it languished for a decade. And to be fair, it wasn't an easy ask. An overseas museum wanting to take taonga abroad and put them on display? There was a fair bit of scepticism from Māori communities. After all, it wouldn't be the first time people had shown up looking for taonga to take to foreign museums. Since James Cook arrived in that first fraught encounter in 1769, people have been hauling taonga Māori offshore. In some cases they were gifted, traded or sold. In many others they were taken, pillaged. There are countless instances of graves being robbed or settlements being looted. They made their way through private collections, the auction houses of London and New York, on all kinds of journeys. In most cases, they've ended up in museums. Arapata Hakiwai is Kaihotu of Te Papa Tongarewa. In a 2025 interview with RNZ's Māpuna, he was asked just how many taonga Māori and Moriori are in overseas museums.
It's thousands. It's well over the 15,000, 16,000. And when you look at it, like museums, and this is just a conservative figure, museums, there's well over 33 museums in the United States, well over 30 museums in the UK that hold Māori taonga, and many of them hold large numbers. The Field Museum hold probably one of the largest, over 2,500 Māori taonga, held at the Field Museum in Chicago. And for me, it's like the reality there that we have a large percentage of our indigenous cultural heritage held offshore. And a large percentage of that cultural heritage comes from a very early period. And that cultural heritage should be connected or reconnected back to Māori people and Moriori people. And I think, the sad reality is that over 90%, over 95% wouldn't be aware of that, wouldn't be aware of the extent of that or where their taonga are or who have them.
My name is Ngarino Alice. I am a Professor of Art History at the University of Auckland, Waipapa Taumatarau.
And a Professor of Art History, and you're Māori. How many of those exist in the world?
0! So I was just appointed 7 months ago as a full professor.
Ngarino says many museums don't even know where their collections come from.
If we think about 90% of our taonga overseas are on provenance, so we don't know where they're from as yet. If we have more research, we will be able to do that. But with some of them, they might have like 300 answers, and it's really hard to know where all of those answers are.
That helps to understand why the initial reaction from many Māori to the idea of a touring exhibition of their taonga was, well, doubt, scepticism and suspicion. Museums didn't have the best reputations with Indigenous peoples, like the big stone Dominion Museum in Wellington.
Relics among the ancient hills. In Wellington, the National Museum preserves for all time rare objects which embody the history and culture of the Maoris. One of the most advanced races of the Pacific, the Maoris adorned with intricate carvings their dwellings and their canoes.
For a long time, Māori art had been considered primitive, naive, folksy, a curio for collectors.
This is a typical war canoe, and that is its fighting face, enough to scare off either enemies or evil spirits. Today, a modern Maori surveys one of the oldest and most cherished relics of his race. Legend says that this stone was the anchor of Kupi, the Polynesian adventurer who discovered New Zealand. Many tribes fought over Kupi's anchor, and when they fought, they made faces like this.
Snapshots of a time long gone, its people and practitioners described in a stubborn past tense. Think of Ngā Puna Waihanga last episode, an art world full of life, evolution and vitality. You weren't seeing that at the Dominion Museum, our national museum, displaying something uniquely New Zealand as if it were alien. If Douglas Newton wanted to pull off Te Māori, he had a lot of work to do. So he got on a plane and travelled to Aotearoa. He went on a road trip from marae to marae, asking for taonga to be part of the exhibition. He had an ally in Hirini Mokomead, who was determined that the world see our treasures.
That was when I hated New Zealand back then.
Working with him was Carol Obeso from the American Federation of Arts.
Because that trip was so stressful and so pressured that I don't think that I had any brain space left over to experience anything subtle whatsoever. We had 13 museums to get to in 6 weeks. Every morning we checked out of a hotel. We didn't even take our suitcases out of the car. We just pulled out a clean shirt and some clean clothes and went upstairs and had a sleep and got back in the car and drove on.
What were those meetings like? What discussions did the idea provoke? Well, we have insight into one of them. On the East Coast, Ngāti Kahungunu have a tipuna called Te Kauru o Te Rangi. There's a beautiful pautoko manawa of him, along with his father and uncle and a cousin. They died at the Battle of Te Pakake in 1824 and continue to be remembered in carved form. Ko Te Kauru o Te Rangi is etched across his chest, and he holds a kotiate, a type of short-handled weapon, close. Newton wanted him to be part of Te Māori, so off he went to Hawke's Bay. One of the curators at Hawke's Bay Museum was David Butts. He recalls it well.
Te Kauru o Te Rangi is one of 4 pautoko manawa loaned to the museum in the 1930s by the kaitiaki of those taonga, descendant of Irene Donnelly. Initially, the museum consulted with the family kaitiaki, and it was agreed that Te Kauru o Te Rangi would go with the exhibition, and Te Kauru o Te Rangi went to Auckland to prepare for that process.
Carol Obeso.
I began the arrangements for how to get him to America. I had at least left a specially made crate behind for him, hoping that that dispute would be ironed out in time. And so at least that crate existed. I then had some people from the museum and gallery here go to Hawke's Bay, pick him up, bring him back to Auckland, pack him into that special crate.
There was a wider discussion about whether that should happen, and Te Kauru o Te Rangi came back to Napier. And there was quite a substantial kui where the participation was discussed and a decision was made.
Then came up the dispute of whether he would travel by himself. You know, in the individual value, the dollar value of that particular piece was not something that we would ordinarily send a courier all the way to New Zealand for. It was actually of quite low value relative to many other things that we might transport. And so the obvious answer was, of course, we'll just put him on a flight and he'll go by himself. And I fought that tooth and nail, because I realized the importance of that piece. I had seen those people who were from that region and how they felt about him and how they regarded him. And I said that the dollar value was absolutely not even to be considered here, that he had to be treated with the importance that he actually had, and that I would never be able to sleep or to live with myself if that piece went off unaccompanied all the way from New Zealand through to New York with several changes of aircraft with no accompaniment. So I really fought that, and while there was some reluctance to spend the money for a courier for just one piece, they finally agreed.
There was an agreement that when the people at Waiheke built a new house, that those Pūtātara would come out of the museum and go back into that new house. And the reason I raise this is because that has happened just in very recent times. 2021, the new house, Hautaunanui, was opened and the Pūtātara went back into the house. So things that began to shift around Te Māori there's been a long outcome of some of those discussions.
Carol Obiso traversed the motu, meeting with iwi and visiting museums. In the US, she was responsible for travelling with and caring for the taonga. She wrote a book called First Light about how this experience changed her. But it was not without its challenges.
I would say that Te Māori was not only not free of controversy, Te Māori was about controversy. I think Te Māori was about, for everyone involved, confronting controversy and resolving it instead of stuffing it away as if it didn't exist and trying to proceed as if there were no controversy. It brought things to a head. It made us face certain issues.
Back then, consultation with whānau hapuaniwi wasn't the norm. Take Pūkaki. You might know him from the 20-cent coin. He's a tipuna of Ngāti Whakauwe, carved into a 5-metre kuwaha that once stood at Ohinemutu, the steaming lakeside village. In the 19th century, Ngāti Whakauwe agreed to lease 50 acres to the Crown to establish Rotorua's CBD. When the deal was signed, Pūkaki was given as a symbol of trust. But that trust was broken. He was eventually given away and languished for a century in the basement of the Auckland Museum.
Ngāti Whakauwe doesn't become aware of this until over a century later, thanks to the efforts of tribal researcher Paul Tapsell. He writes his master's thesis about the Pūkaki saga.
Newton wanted Pūkaki at Te Māori too. But that kicked up a bit of a fuss among Ngāti Whakauwe, who hadn't realised he'd been given to Auckland Museum.
And what follows is an honourable part of museum history. The Auckland Museum Board of Trustees decides to give Pūkaki back to Ngāti Whakauwe, who in turn will gift it to the Crown in terms of the tribe's original intentions.
At the end of 6 weeks, Newton and Obiso had managed to convince a majority of iwi of the merits of Te Māori. The exhibition could go ahead. And Pūkaki would become one of the exhibition's most memorable taonga. And the Americans lapped it up. Douglas Newton again.
Well, I would say that the main surprise was, though we expected lavish interest and applause, was the degree of it. I think this has been one of the more better publicised and better welcomed exhibitions that the museum's had for years.
Can you account for that?
What it had to do with is the sheer quality of the works of art, of sculpture, carving, great presence and their great impressiveness. That's what does it.
The large Māori contingent who flew to New York were equally moved. Tūhoi leader John Rangiho was there, his mokopuna in his arms. He said, "Although you are a child of this world, your roots are still big in Ruatahuna." He'd then gestured to the displays before him. You are this, and they are you, your inheritance. The sound quality is awful, sorry, but he has some nice thoughts.
I was reminded, that we've come a long way. To be represented here by those artifacts that we have, some which can stand up to the art of all the world which I've seen enclosed in this place, it just boggles the mind, doesn't it, really? And to be part of it in this way is to really feel just how much amiss we have been in the past, in a sense, in New Zealand.
Iri Hapiti Ramsden was similarly moved.
That was one of the high points of my life. It's like coming in here. Each of your own tribal taonga pulls you to it, but that whole exhibition pulled me. I wanted to see it outside Aotearoa, to see how the people reacted to it, do the wrong thing. But when I got inside there, a tangi came up, and it just burst out. And not only ngā roi mata, but ngā hupe, everything. But it was mixed with other, because we had to go through the Egyptians and all their mana into ours.
There's no doubt Te Māori caused a swelling of pride for many Māori. To watch our people walk up the steps of the Met, to hear our karakia echo down Fifth Avenue, to hear our language in those marbled halls, and to see our taonga, our art, in the spotlight. It showed that where our taonga are, so too must our language and culture be. Maina Mackenzie, from Ngāti Hauiti, Ngāti Raukawa, Te Atu Haunui a Pāpārangi and Rangitane, defined the significance.
Up to now, we've actually been largely, although this is probably a bit of a generalisation, studied as primitive peoples or as primitive art through the fields of anthropology and art history maybe, but now we can be looked at as a civilization of people equal on the world stage who can speak for ourselves, and we don't need necessarily only be studied in the realms of another culture's discipline. We can stand and speak as a people ourselves with our own voice.
It might be worth mentioning that Maina Mackenzie was the only woman on the Te Māori organising committee. We'll hear a lot more from Maina in the next episode. Much of the glory around Te Māori was around the shifts in practices, but the exhibition itself still sat within that old, primitive display style, contextualised within a Western gallery. Here's David Butts.
Te Māori is an exhibition. It's not actually talked about much as an exhibition. It's more about the processes that happened around openings and things like that. But as an exhibition in the United States, it's slotted in with the program of primitive art exhibition style that those art institutions were using at the time.
Ultimately, as moving as it was Te Māori still just a collection of things and cases and on plinths? Was this just another case of taonga overseas, lonely, disconnected from their home and contexts? The praise from back home, while definitely there, had some caveats. The academic Bernard Kernot wrote that despite significant Māori input, it was still an American concept designed for the American public. If people walked in there, would they still think Māori, as a people, were alive? A review in the New York Times said,
"Bargeboard and gable apex are shown in isolation. Paddles are shown but not a complete canoe. There is a gateway to a fort, and very impressive, but the gateway leads nowhere. The meeting house, without which Māori societies would have found it hard to exist, is likewise in vestigial form. Looking at these things, a line of Eliot's wasteland comes to mind. These fragments I have shored against my ruins."
And its selection was ultimately in the hands of Douglas Newton.
The Queen Elizabeth Arts Council sent over a large collection of photographs of things in museums. I worked through, made a preliminary selection of 180 or 90. We had various refusals from museums and, of course, from the Maori people themselves. And substitutions were made for some things. But basically it worked out to just about the first selection that we made together.
And what sort of criteria were you using for the selection?
Really trying to get the objects which seemed to represent the arts best historically, both historically, which is a very important factor because there's 1,000 years of Maori history which one has to represent, and the high points of the sculpture. The sort of things that would ultimately most impress people here and show off the really extraordinary qualities of the art.
That raised some questions from Kernot, who wrote,
"Why, for example, was the cut-off date set at 1860? The exhibition collection is a very historical one. And besides, 1860 seems to have been arbitrarily chosen. Could one surmise that his American public could relate more easily to a romanticised past than a less comfortable present? After all, Te Māori in the United States must have raised questions for Americans about Indian art traditions.
Flicking through the articles and reviews from Te Māori, while there is definitely a flood of pride and glowing reviews, the feeling wasn't necessarily universal. Two features in both Tū Tangata and the Listener write of an awkward contrast. This was 1984. The celebration of Māori art on Fifth Avenue came at a time of great change in New Zealand.
Behind me we have a Prime Minister.
I want us to go from here tonight, working for New Zealand, rejoicing that we have had this victory, and then setting ourselves to work together.
David Lange's Labour government was about to embark on a significant economic overhaul. But as Professor Ngātata Love told RNZ, its effects would be disproportionate.
There was a decision made to restructure the whole economy. And so what we found is that the jobs that we had been brought to the cities for during the 40s, 50s, 60s and 70s disappeared overnight. So those who had been brought to work in the telephone exchange, on railways, in the freezing works, in the woolen mills and in the manufacturing sector, with the restructuring they all went.
Communities like Kawero, Murupara and Tokoroa fell from prosperous to impoverished almost instantly. By 1992, 1 in 4 Māori would be unemployed.
Who were made to lose their jobs in this restructuring? There's no doubt about it, was the Māori and Pacific Islanders. Now, that was because they were in those vulnerable positions when the restructuring occurred.
As Te Māori was on its 2-year tour of the US, you couldn't help but feel the awkward dichotomy, an idealised image of Māoridom to sell abroad as communities faced economic ruin. Were we letting ourselves be used in a sort of soft diplomacy? Kernot, concluding his essay, wondered.
It must be an open question to what extent public attention has been diverted from the pressing and urgent needs of the people by the glamour of Te Māori.
The Wellington unionist Huirangi Waikerepudu was quoted by the Listener. Many of our people are unemployed and trying to survive. They don't have time for this. Mobil Oil's sponsorship of Te Māori also came under criticism. Its $2 million made the project possible, but it outraged Te Atiawa, who were busy fighting pollution on their reefs in Taranaki through the Waitangi Tribunal. They boycotted Te Māori. Remember the revolution that was sweeping the country last episode? The protests about land, language, environment and te tiriti? That was very much still going on. Te Māori wasn't the only revolutionary event in the early 80s.
The concept of the kohanga reo is bringing the whānau together and looking to the future of the child. And not only the child, really, it's for all of us, with its language, with its values, with its quality, with regard to our taha Māori. We are just bringing back something to our own families, to our own children, that whānau system that you must have been brought up in, and bringing that extended whānau back into the kohanga reo, and also looking at our language, to revive our language.
Hinete Iwa is the goddess associated with fibre arts, birth and motherhood. Her domain is that of Te Wharepora, the realm in which weaving, known as raranga and whatu, are nurtured. So in a period where Māori are holding the government to account over land, language, the environment and te tiriti, how was it that gender roles were completely overlooked? Where were the wahine? Despite the tohunga karakia wearing kakahu and the toa wearing piu-piu at the pōhiri, there were no fibre arts in Te Māori. The writer Patricia Grace said that was very much felt. She was in a collective called Haiata with the painter Robin Kahukiwa.
Robin was thinking, well, a lot of us were, but she in particular was talking about the art of Māori women not being part of Te Māori. And I think some of these things were the beginnings of leading up to the formation of Haiata.
Robin Kahukiwa was an artist of Ngāti Porou and Te Aitanga Hauiti descent. And we'll hear plenty more from Haiata in this series. Robin's work depicts the realities of urban life for many Māori, one of disconnection and dispossession. She gained prominence in 1984, the same year as Te Māori, with her exhibition Wahine Toa.
I don't consider myself a political artist or a feminist artist, but I do get concerned about things like that, and I guess they're inherent in the work I do then. It comes out in the work I do. I mean, when the Land March was on, I did a painting about that, and I've never done one about the Springbok tour, though I went on the marches, but there's something there that I want to sort of do too. I'm a woman who paints, and sometimes my messages might be political.
Another big thing missing from Te Māori was contemporary art. By the 80s, Māori artists had been studying, teaching and practising as contemporary artists since the days of Selwyn Te Ngāti Wilson in the 1940s. The Auckland Art Gallery bought a painting of his in 1948, making it the first contemporary Māori work to enter a public collection. He reflected in 1993.
One doesn't teach art just to make artists and art teachers. What I always aimed to give all students was an awareness of the place where they live and an eye for design of all functional things around us.
The Met says more than 200,000 people visited Te Māori over the 4 months it was in New York. The exhibition then travelled to St. Louis and San Francisco before having its final showing at the Field Museum in Chicago. By 1986, it was time for the taonga to come home.
This giant crate in which this gateway, Pukeora, will be packed, is being wheeled into the gallery. And there's a team, let me work it out now, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 or 12 museum staff members have got this box. Carol Obiso is now briefing them as to what to do.
Henare Te Ua was there at the Field Museum, speaking to Carol Obiso as a huge gateway. Pukeora was packed away.
How are plans going for moving Pukeora?
Plans are going well. We're cleaning up the area, and pretty soon we'll gather the 20 people or so that this is going to take and begin talking them through the choreography of this. We spend more time talking it through. When we actually take the brackets off and begin to take him down, it goes very, very quickly, because with the 1,000 pounds or so that this weighs in their hands, there's no stopping once it starts coming down.
And then it was off. On board an Air New Zealand 747, 30,000 feet above Te Moana Nui Akiwa, Hereni Moko Mead reflected on the taonga's journey.
So we now know that the reaction of the American public at New York was no accident, because it's been the same at St. Louis and the same at San Francisco, even though we're dealing with entirely different kinds of populations in each one of those states. And yet the impact has been very similar, and the reaction of the American people to Maori culture has been the same. You contrast that to the reaction at home, where from a Maori point of view, the Pākehā reaction at home is muted, and it's definitely not open and forthcoming as we've seen here overseas. And any praise for Maori culture is not given very willingly. And I believe it's got something to do with our colonial experience and our history, that we can't quite rid ourselves of the attitudes that belong to our past. And for the Maori people to actually come out of New Zealand and go and do what is virtually our culture, doing our cultural thing, it's an uplifting experience for our people. It's a liberating experience for them to realize that their culture is beautiful, and that other people react to it in a powerful, emotional way. And so what we were getting at all of these venues overseas was a confirmation to the Māori people that we've been right. We've been right to hold fast to our culture, to hold fast to Māoritanga, that we really do have something to give to the world at large. And if the New Zealand Pākehā rejects it, well, I think from now on, what we have to say is that's their hard luck.
At Auckland Airport, kuia and kaumātua from around Aotearoa gathered. Te Māori was home. Americans seemed to love it. Would New Zealanders care in the same way? What had changed in the 2 years the taonga had been away? And what legacy would it leave? That's next time. Pūtātara, Revolutions and Māori Art is presented by me, Matariki Williams, and the producer is Jamie Tahana. It's made with the support of the Creative New Zealand, New Zealand On Air and the RNZ Arts and Culture Podcast Co-Fund. Strategic advisors are Yana Te Nahu Owen and Rosabelle Tan. Thanks also to RNZ's Justin Gregory. Archival audio comes from the RNZ collection at Ngā Taonga Sound and Vision. A particular thanks to Steve Russell. The theme music is by Te Kahurere Mō Taumata, and the graphic design is by Dexter Edwards. You can follow and listen to all our episodes wherever you get your podcasts.